Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this month's Bristol Fundraising Group event. We are delighted to be joined by Stacey Teece, Trust Fundraising Consultant from Moneytree Fundraising. Stacey has over 20 years of experience in fundraising. She's worked for large organizations, small organizations, national and local, across a whole range of fundraising practices, from legacies to trust to major donors. However, she's here today to talk to us about the new Code of Fundraising Practice, which, as we know, has just been updated. She can't guarantee she's going to make it fun, but she will hopefully make it interesting and relevant for us. So I'm going to hand over to Stacey. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Emma. Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. We've come together to have a look, as Emma said, at the new Code of Fundraising Practice and hopefully what that means for your organisation. I have tried to make this very dry subject interesting for you, so fingers crossed that you at least take something away from today. What I wanted to do was make sure after this session you can fundraise confidently and transparently, and then you can demonstrate that if you're ever asked to, because that is the heart of what the new changes to the code mean for us and our organizations. So what are we going to look at today? I'll quickly talk you through what we're going to cover in this session. We'll start by setting the scene around why the fundraising regulator has updated the code. Then we'll spend some time being explicit about what has actually changed in the new code. And because I think that's where a lot of the anxiety and the confusion tends to sit. And then we'll also look at a couple of practical scenarios and finish with some next steps before we open up for some questions. So hopefully that sounds all good. So why has the fundraising regulator updated the code? The last major version of the code was introduced in 2019. And since then, I don't know about you, but the fundraising landscape has changed significantly. Think of all the digital giving and cashless, contactless donation opportunities there are now, how much we use AI in our fundraising, or at least we're putting our tentative steps into it, and the increased expectation around transparency and trust within the sector. The fundraising regulator began its full review in late 2022. And as a result, this new code is a lot shorter, it's more streamlined, and it's designed to be more flexible and easier to navigate. The implementation of the code was on the 1st of November, but there is still a period of transition. So it's still now a good time to check that you have all your updated policies, your staff trainings in place, and that you have good fundraising practice embedded across your organisation. So you're not late to the party. Don't worry, there's still time to get things sorted. I think the biggest shift in the code is that it's moved from good intent to demonstrable practice. That good intent still matters. Your professional judgment as fundraisers still matters. But what the code asks now is a different question. Not just, did we do the right thing, but how can we show and we did, and why we did what we did. It's all about being able to evidence decisions if you're questioned, calmly, clearly, and proportionately, because you have all the evidence to hand, because you've put all of these things in place that we're going to talk about next. Oops, skipped one. The new code has deliberately moved to being principles-based rather than rules-based. So if you're looking to the code for rules of what you should do, it isn't there anymore. What they've done is strip out a lot of those rules and pointed you in the direction of where they should be. So gift aid isn't explicitly listed. You have to now look at the gift aid rules for that. GPDR isn't explicitly listed. You have to look at the additional rules for that. And that has what shortened it a lot of the times, because otherwise they were having to update in two places. Now it just signposts you to where all of those are. What it also does is recognize that organizations don't all operate in the same way. You are all different sizes, you're all differently based geographically, your remit is different, and you might have local nuances that make a difference to how you fundraise. That means that you can apply the code proportionately to how it matters to you. But with that flexibility comes responsibility. You are expected to be able to explain how the principles are applied in your context for your organisation, and then to be able to evidence that. So Everything in the code flows from four principles: legal, open, honest, and respectful. These principles aren't new, they've always been in the code, but the expectation that organizations can demonstrate them is so much clearer, and it's laid out so you can see these principles better. We're going to have a quick look at what each of these principles actually means. So, when the code talks about fundraising being legal, it means complying with fundraising law, regulation, and with the code itself. What's changed is the emphasis on systems and records that support that compliance. So, that means having appropriate policies in place, understanding your legal obligations, and being able to show that fundraising activity is monitored and overseen, not just assumed to be compliant. And we're going to dive into these a little bit further as we go through. So then open is about being clear with donors about who you are, what you're asking for, and how funds will be used. The code is now clearer that openness needs to be proactive. You need to be going out there saying, this is what we'll use the funds for, this is how we'll use your money, this is how we're going to look after you. So, for example, if circumstances change, an appeal target doesn't meet, or you shift your plans and things change, you're not going to do things quite how you set out to do them, donors should be told, and those decisions and communications you have with your donors should be recorded. Being open in this way protects you as fundraisers and protects the trust that you have with your donors, so it's a good thing. Respect is about how we treat our donors, how we treat our beneficiaries, but also our volunteers and our staff. It includes more sensitivity in legacy conversations and the interactions that we might have with bereaved supporters. The code expects clearer safeguards, clearer boundaries, and again, making sure those records are up to date when you have interactions with people. That's so that respect can be demonstrated if asked, not just assumed that you've done it. And then we move on to respect. Do we move on to, these are my papers. Do we move on to respect? Yes. Did I scribble it down? Yeah. Yes, that's it. No, did I do respect? I'm so confused then. Did I do respect? I think I did, didn't I? Yes, I did do respect. That's what threw me off. I scrolled down, but it didn't move the thing. Knowing these principles and understanding what's behind them really matters, because if you're ever questioned by a donor, by the public, by the regulator, you need to be able to show how decisions have been made and what safeguards were in place. That protects your organisation, it protects you as staff, it protects volunteers, and protects the trustees in their governance role. The biggest thing that has changed within the code is that you now need to demonstrate that you have clearly had discussions and made decisions about all of the things that we're going to talk about today, and that you have written that down somewhere and can demonstrate if asked. These are the policies and the procedures that we follow. Here are the interactions that we've had. Here are the communications that we've had with our donors. And there's no set rules about what those things are, because they want the code to be flexible for your circumstance, but you have to demonstrate that you have thought about what those circumstances are and what that looks like for your organisation. That is absolutely the biggest change. So we talked about the four principles: legal, open, honest, and respectful. What I want to do now is just a quick exercise to bring some of this to life. I'm going to share with you a few short scenarios. For each one, I'd like you to think about, or pop in the chat if you want to, what principle you feel is most at risk. There isn't always a single right answer here. The aim is to get used to applying judgment, because that's exactly what the code expects you to do. So, scenario one: a fundraising email slightly tweaks a case study to exaggerate the impact of a project to encourage donations. What principle feels most at risk here out of open, honest, respectful, and legal? Again, there's no right or wrong answers. Some of these principles will overlap. There's no prize at the end. I'm sorry for getting it right, apart from, the pride that you did. If you get all four right, that'd be amazing. So yeah, we're getting a lot of honest and open. That's amazing. Yep, most people I think would identify honest here, making sure that communications are accurate and not misleading. But absolutely, there is an element of being open here, depending on how you're presenting that information. But yep, open and honest is where I'd put this one. So scenario 2, a supporter says they feel pressured. Oh, that did it again. There we go. A supporter says they feel pressured to give more than they intended during an in-person conversation. What principle do you think is most at risk here? Getting a few respectfuls come through. Yep. Yep. Yep, respectful is absolutely where I would put this one, is showing that supporters are treated with care and not placed under undue pressure. Some people are saying legal. There could be a potentially legal if there's a GPDR or a policy break here that you might have, but this one for me feels more in the respectful camp. So scenario 3, personal donor information is shared internally without clear consent or purpose. What principle is at most risk here? Yep, lots of legals coming through. Yep, definitely. Yep, I would put this at legal, potentially with a little bit of open, because you're not being open about why you're sharing this and what the purpose of sharing it is for, but ensuring that that data protection requirement is met, as well as being respectfully confidential, is definitely a legal issue. And then scenario 4, a complaint is received but not recorded or followed up. What principle is most at risk here? What do we think? So for me, this one strongly links to being open as well as being respectful. Yeah, open and respectful is where I put this, ensuring concerns are taken seriously and handled transparently. So as you can see from these, it's important to notice that all of these scenarios, these principles sometimes overlap. So it's looking at, are you doing all these 4 things where you need to for the different scenarios that might pop up for your organization. And in reality, situations are rarely clear cut, are they? And the code is not expecting perfection. It's expecting thoughtful judgment with clear evidence of why you've made those judgments, and then procedures to help you follow and make sure everybody is clear about what they need to do. I think the key question here is, can we explain our decision and show that we've considered the impact on the supporter? That's a really good way of looking at it, and seeing whether you've hit everything that you need to. So we're going to move on from principles and into practice and be very explicit about what has changed in the code and what that means for your organization's day to day. One area where the code is stronger is the protection of fundraisers themselves. This actually has a rule 2.1.2. So if you're a bit nerdy like me, you can look it up and see all this lovely information for yourself. But under this rule, the charity must take reasonable steps to protect fundraisers from harm and harassment while fundraising. So if your organization is doing any trust work or major donor visits or legacy meetings that take place outside the office, then this might mean reviewing your loan working policy to make sure that fundraisers feel supported. And that means if they're working from home, do they feel supported working from home? And is there an accessible route to raising any concerns or stopping any activity if it becomes unsafe or inappropriate? And also making sure that you're empowering your fundraisers to be able to report anything if they see it, that they don't have any concerns about bringing up anything that they're concerned about. And this also extends to any volunteer fundraisers that you have in your care. So you should be asking, do your employee contracts or volunteer agreements clearly cover safety and lone working? Are staff and volunteers trained in recognising risk and safeguarding? Are there incident reporting procedures, and are they clear and tested? So those are the key things under this kind of new rule that you need to be having a look at. Everything you have in place should be clearly logged and periodically reviewed to demonstrate compliance, and making sure that you're still being compliant within the rules and values that your organisation has set out against this new code. So payment and remuneration. This might not be something that you're doing as an organization. It might not be a route that you ever want to go down, but because it is explicitly set out in the new code, I think it's something that we should cover. The new code doesn't ban commission or performance pay outright, but it shifts the focus onto you as an organization. You must ensure that payment models are aligned with your values. They avoid creating undue pressure on donors and are transparent and justifiable. So again, this is where they've looked at the different scenarios, and rather than putting in a blanket rule that covers all organisations, it's asking you to think as your organisation and your values, what works best for you, what fits best for you, what feels right for you. Any new incentive that you are bringing in should be documented, why they exist, how they align with your values, how they won't distort donor care and cause any undue pressure. So again, this might not be relevant to you, but just in case it is, it's worth just bearing all this in mind. You know, if you're worried about if there's any new rules that set out whether you can and can't do this, it's all about comparing it to the values of your organisation. Legacy fundraising, it always is, has been, and always will be a key area for many charities. And the new code places really strong expectations on how these interactions are handled. You must be absolutely clear about the purpose of any legacy conversations. So you must be really explicit on why you're having that conversation with somebody and that it is going to be a legacy conversation. They must be free from pressure. You must be able to decline the meeting if you want to. You must be allowed to bring a guest or a family member with you to those meetings. And us as organisations must be sure to record all meetings and conversations around legacies. And that could be really tricky. I did this presentation to a small local hospice. And they said, you know, their legacy conversations can really happen organically when they're talking to a patient or talking to the patient's family about their intentions to leave a legacy, and then they'll go away and, you know, they'll get on with their day. But it's making sure you give yourself that moment to jot down some notes from that conversation so you can upload them to your CRM or wherever you keep that information, because it's really important. If there was ever a complaint about that conversation, the person said they felt, you know, there was undue pressure, or if you don't have any notes from that conversation at all, it's really hard then to demonstrate what might have been said and how that conversation came around, that it was organic, that you didn't intend to have the legacy conversation. So it's really important that you do make time to document those conversations. And then when you're working with external will writing partners, this is, I don't think it's changed, but there's definitely more onus on it. The charity remains responsible for ensuring those partners follow the same standards. So the buck doesn't stop. If there's a complaint, it doesn't stop with that will writing partner. The complaint will be directed to you, because you, as the organisation using that will writer, need to make sure you have kept an eye on them, that what they're doing, that everything they're sending is proportionate and that they are following the same rules. So what checks and protocols exist for you making sure those third-party providers are doing what you want them to do, that they're following the same guidance and values that you have, and making sure that there's something in your contracts with them that makes sure that they follow these rules. And so if there is a complaint, you can go back to your contracts and go, well, you know, yes, the buck stops with us, but it was in the contract with you that you would follow these rules and you haven't. So it's making sure that you have all of those things in place to make sure that you're safeguarding the supporter journey, that you're safeguarding the donor's confidence in what you're doing, and you're upholding that trust and open and respect from the principles. Capital appeals, this is another place where there's been a little bit of strengthening of what they expect from organisations. If you're running a capital appeal or even a specific purpose appeal, so building works, equipment, or any restricted project, you've got to be clearer about accountability and transparency. Donors must be told in advance what happens if the target's not met. So maybe the project might be scaled down, you might delay, you might have an alternative plan. What if the target is exceeded, something we all dream will happen? Surplus funds might be used for a related project, or you might even return those funds. And then you must act in line with that upfront statement and communicate the outcome to all donors that you are able to contact. So when you're planning for your capital appeals or your restricted funding appeals, that's one of the first things that you have to do within those planning meetings is decide what your different scenarios will be. What if we get too much money? What if we don't get enough money? How are we going to communicate that to our donors? And at what point are we going to do that, communicate that outcome and make sure that all appeals on all of your capital appeals, restricted appeal materials going forward. And again, all decisions that you're making about those elements should be recorded for future reference. That's the one thing that goes through all of these different changes, is that you must be having those conversations, and when you're making those decisions, everything has to be documented, and then how you communicate with your donors also has to be documented. So digital giving and unstaffed collections. As fundraising evolves, many donors are now giving via contactless terminals, QR codes, online platforms, or through third-party partners. The code clarifies that digital and unstaffed collections are not exempt from anything that we've talked about. They must meet the same transparency standards. So if you're doing a capital appeal or a restricted appeal, you have to have the same wording around those unstaffed collection points as you would do on any printed materials. You have to say who's collecting, how that money will be used, and what's the benefit to your beneficiaries. It's the same with third-party platforms. So if you're using any third-party donation platforms, Just Giving, anything like that, it's a little bit more tricky with third-party platforms. Some of it comes down to making sure you're using a platform that fits with your values, but the regulator recognises that some of the things, such as, when I think about some of the fees that might be charged by those third-party platforms that aren't as upfront as we would like them to be as organisations, aren't within our wheelhouse to be able to change. But the fundraising regulator is trying to work with those third-party platforms to make those things. But what we can do as organisations is be upfront that you might find that there are some additional fees by making your donations via those platforms, and being upfront and transparent and open with our donors, that you might find that. I know there was, when I did a Christmas appeal a couple of years ago, there was a donor who wanted to make a large gift through Just Giving, and they didn't like the fact that they were putting on these big additional fees. So we offered him an alternative way to make that donation rather than doing it from the platform. And then from then on, we would always offer that alternative way for him to make. We anticipated that he wouldn't want to make his donation that way. So it's thinking about those things and offering those alternative ways to give that don't incur a charge, and being open and transparent that there are other ways to give, and just that we as organisations will have to look at our gift aid, because it's usually gift aid that we want to use those platforms for, because it's easier to collect gift aid that way. So we will have to look at that a different way. So you need to be monitoring and reviewing any online donation pages that you have to make sure that they're clear and transparent, who's collecting, how it's used, what's the benefit, any external fundraising platforms that you're using, any unmanned donation boxes, if you're using those, and making sure that your signage and online statements are compliant and up to date. And with those third-party providers, it's making sure that you have oversight clauses in them if you can, and monitoring their compliance with the new principles. Even if you document that you have looked into it and this is the best platform to use for our organisation for X, Y, and Z, but we recognise that they charge fees and aren't as transparent as we would like, at least you can demonstrate that you've had that conversation internally, that you've thought about it, and that you are trying, we're using this platform maybe because it's the most popular one, it's easier to collect gift aid, etc., etc. But you've documented that that's why you've done that, and hopefully the conversations that the regulator are having upwards will make that a little bit easier for us going forward. So working with others, again, this goes, back to that third party we've talked about with legacies, and we've talked about with those third party providers, those donation platforms. Anywhere that fundraising is outsourced or involves external partners, agencies, will writing firms, those donation platforms, even volunteers raising in aid of the charity, the new code makes it explicitly clear that the charity remains accountable for your partner's actions. So you must vet them, you must contact them appropriately, and you must monitor them. So that means training, oversight, review of outcomes, and ensuring they comply with your values that you've set out and those of the new code. So that might mean, if someone is raising money in aid of the charity, are you contacting them appropriately? Are you thanking them for doing that for you? Do you have a fundraising pack that you can then send out to them that has all your rules and all your guidance in there to help them? Because, if they don't do it, then that's down to them. But you have put everything in place. You have demonstrated to them, this is what we expect you to do in our name. It also works the other way. If there's someone out there who is fundraising on your behalf, you don't know anything about them, you have never been informed about them, you have no communication with them, but yet they get a complaint because they've used the wrong logo or they've done the wrong thing, you can demonstrate, actually, we haven't had any contact with them. Here is our procedure that we have when we're working with anybody who's raising money on our behalf. And as you can see, we haven't had any contact with them. We've never been informed that they're doing that work, because here's the procedure we would have followed if that had happened. So having that great procedure in place and demonstrating that you've done it in the past can also help if you've never been contacted by somebody and they are raising money on your behalf. With those external fundraising partners, you need to check all of your contracts and any new contracts going forward to make sure that you've got monitoring arrangements in there, and that you have agreed outcomes, and that you are making sure that they are following everything that you have to do as an organisation, that they are also doing that. So whether that's providing them with statements that you want them to use, rather than them going out and putting out their own marketing out there and their own words out there, it's making sure that you've done everything you can to make sure they know what you expect from them, and that they are going to follow that and be complicit. Because if it's all laid out there, if they get a complaint, you can point people to, yes, we will take responsibility for that, but we have set all of this out in our contract with them. And then managing donations around returns. The new code sets out clearer standards about how donations are accepted, refused, or returned. You should have a gift acceptance policy that sets out the criteria for your organisation. So again, this comes down to the new code is flexible to allow you to set that criteria out for what it means for your organisation. But refusal or return of a donation should be rare and justifiable. So you need to have that acceptance gift policy that sets out what that means for your organisation. You have to then, of any individual decision that's made, must be documented with the rationale. So the reason why that donation was accepted, refused, or returned. You also have to ensure that funds that are restricted or no, if they're just restricted, if they're funds that are restricted, you can trace those funds in your account if you were ever asked to. If you receive large or unusual gifts, due diligence is required to manage reputational risk. There is no guidance over what a large or unusual gift looks like. Again, that's down to you as your organisation, because a very small organisation, £1,000 might be a large gift for you. A larger one, £1 million might be a large gift for you. So it's up to you in your gift acceptance policy to set that out and decide what that looks like for you. So this is a great opportunity to review that acceptance refusal policy. Ensure that your decision-making process is clear and really well documented. And this also goes for your volunteers as well. If any of your volunteers are helping out at events where there's money that's to be handled, if they're helping you in your office with anything, any donations that come through, they also need the training on the acceptance and refusal of gifts. They need to be able to see your gift acceptance policy, and you need to be able to make sure that they are comfortable with that, and when to kind of raise the red flag that something needs to be looked at a little bit more. But again, there's no explicit rules around this. It's what it looks like for you and your organisation. If you're a lung cancer charity, you might not want to accept donations from anybody linked with smoking. If you're an animal welfare, you might not want to do anything that's, you know, the fair trade or anything like that. So it really does come down to what fits with the values of your organisation, and what you will accept or refuse. Then supporter care and complaints. This is somewhere where the regulator really looks very closely at. At the heart, it's about how people experience your organisation when something goes wrong or when they have a concern, and how you work with them around that. It's not just about asking for support fundraising, is it? It's about how you treat people throughout that relationship, particularly when they feel unhappy or uncomfortable. Sometimes that can be the remaking of a relationship if you treat them well and look after them well when they've made a complaint. So the code has always required an organisation to have a complaints procedure. But what's changed is the expectation around accessibility, consistency, and evidence. So it's no longer enough just to have your policy somewhere on your website. The expectation is that that complaint is really easy to make, either internally or externally, for your beneficiaries, for your staff, for your volunteers, or for your supporters. That all of those complaints are taken seriously, that they're responded to promptly, and that they're used to improve practice. So what does that mean in practice? First, you need to make sure that your complaints procedure is clear and accessible. A supporter should be able to understand without difficulty how to make a complaint, who to contact, what will happen next, and how long it will take to work through that complaint. It should be really easy to find. So definitely on your website, in your fundraising materials, or in your communications that you have with supporters. Secondly, you need to make sure that there is consistency on how you approach complaints. That means having a really clear internal process, and make sure that your staff know what that process is. So you need to know who's responsible for responding to that complaint, what are the timescales, and when does something need to be escalated. And that's for your volunteers as well. They need to be aware of your complaints procedure and know where to take it next and who they should be talking to about that. Third, and this is where the code has really strengthened expectations, as it has across the board here, is around record keeping. If there's one thing you can take away from this, it's about record keeping and making sure you have everything you need. There should be a clear record of the complaint itself, how it was investigated, the outcome, and any action that was taken as a result. And then the fourth thing is that the new code wants you to take those complaints and use them as a learning tool. If you start to see patterns or repeated concerns, that should trigger a review of your approach to that issue. There's something there that's not quite working because we've had X, Y, and Z complaints about it. It might be communications, it might be your process, or it might be a training issue with your staff or your volunteers. The code is really clear that organisations should be able to show they're reflecting on feedback and making improvements because of it. And there's a governance issue to complaints as well. Trustees should have some visibility of complaints. Not necessarily every case, and not necessarily they're going to be handling that complaint unless it gets that far in your complaints procedure, but an overview. They should be able to see how many complaints are being received, the nature of those complaints, and whether there are any risks or trends that are emerging that they need to be aware of. So if someone raises a concern, can you show that you have listened, that you have responded appropriately, and that you've learnt from it? And crucially, can you evidence that if you're asked to? And then that governance that we talked about in that complaints is something that the code really, really, really emphasises now. Trustees and senior leaders must ensure that fundraising is aligned with the organisation's values, compliant with the code and the systems that exist for oversight. The buck stops with your board and your senior leadership team. So they need to be aware of any new campaigns that are coming up, any decisions that you've made around fundraising that you might want to introduce, fundraising that you might stop, those complaints that they might see. This means that minutes of board and committee meetings should record those discussions about fundraising risk, those major appeals. PARN oversight, that's another one that they need to be aware of. payment models, and that you're being transparent with your donors. It might be that you pass all that information up into the board. If you don't go to board yourself, you can never be sure if it's actually been read and digested and understood. But if it's being shown that you're doing that, that the board have had a chance to have a look at that, and that it's noted in your minutes, that might be all that you can do in that situation. But you need to make sure that they are having sight of the things that you are doing that might cause any reputational risk, any of those complaints, any new fundraising that you're introducing, anything they should be aware of from a compliance point of view. You're not asking them to make decisions around any of that. You're just making them aware all those decisions should have already taken place. But it's important to know that they need to know that, because the buck stops with them. And then AI. So I'm going to touch briefly on AI, because although it's not a standalone section in the code, it sits within several of the principles we've talked about, particularly accountability, openness, and putting people first. I know AI is becoming widely used across fundraising, even if you're just tipping your toes in. You might be drafting applications, you might be writing supporter communications, you might be using it to summarize reports or helping you analyze data. It can save time if used well. But the key point under the code is that using AI does not remove your responsibility. The code is very clear that responsibility cannot be delegated to a system or a tool. It's not banning the use of AI. The expectation is around oversight, accuracy, and accountability. So if you're using AI, it has to be reviewed by a human first after when you've used it. That includes fact checking for accuracy, checking that the tone is appropriate, ensuring that the content reflects your work. We know that AI can sometimes produce very convincing but inaccurate information, so that review step is really, really crucial. Secondly, you have to be very careful about what information is being entered into those AI tools. Personal data, sensitive information about any of your beneficiaries, or anything confidential should not be put into external systems unless you are absolutely clear on data protection and security, because this links to your GDPR responsibilities as well as the expectations in the code around protecting people. Thirdly, there's a question here about transparency and honesty. If AI is used in a way that materially shapes your communications, should you be putting on your communications that it has been generated from AI? And if you didn't feel comfortable being able to do that, should you be using AI in the first place? If you think that would land negatively with your audience, then perhaps AI. There's nothing that says we have to explicitly do that at the minute, although there is an argument to say if we're being open and transparent and we are using AI to form some of our communications, our marketing communications, we should be putting that on. That's a good test of whether you would be comfortable of doing that or not. And if you're not comfortable potentially putting a statement in or being open and transparent with your donors, then perhaps you shouldn't be using it for that particular point. Then you need to think about bias and tone. AI tools are trained on large data sets, and that can unintentionally reflect bias or use language that doesn't reflect or align with your values. Again, that goes back to having that human oversight. For me, that means having a really simple AI policy or guidance in place. That policy should set out what AI can be used for, what it must not be used for, and expectations around review and approval, and definitely how data should be handled. Ultimately, the code is asking organizations to treat AI in the same way as we would any other tool, use it responsibly, apply judgment, and be able to demonstrate that you have proper oversight. And then protecting vulnerable people. This is really high on the new code's agenda. Your staff and volunteers must be able to identify and support vulnerable donors. You must have clear policies in place on how to deal with persons who are potentially vulnerable. What does that mean? There is no guidance around, again, what a vulnerable person looks like, because the code wants you to look at what a vulnerable person means for you and have the clear guidance on what that looks like for you. You have to be able to ensure that fundraisers are not putting undue pressure on them to make a donation or leave a legacy, for example. And each individual must be able to make their own informed choices. I know some organisations won't write to individuals who are over a certain age, 85. I've seen in quite a few organisations, for example. But if that's your key audience and you know that they're all fit and well and healthy, that might not be something you want to consider. That might mean something different for your organisation. Again, you need to make sure that all those decisions are documented and all communication you're making to people is really well documented. And that's all channels, face-to-face, phone, digital, written communications, anything that you've got going out there, you have to think about vulnerable people in that conversation. So we've talked about what's changed in the code and we've looked at how that applies in different situations. What I'd like you to do now is just pause and make this relevant to you and your organisation. I'm not asking you to solve everything. I know some of you won't be in a position to be empowered to be able to do that, but I want you to just reflect on where the changes we've discussed might have an impact for you and your work. So thinking about your own work, ask yourself, what might need to change? What might need to be clearer in terms of processes or responsibilities, and what might need to be better recorded or evidenced. If you want to share something in the chat, please feel free to do that. Sometimes it makes us accountable if we write it down, doesn't it? And if we share it with others. But so please feel free to do that. And then just taking that one step further, what's one practical thing you could do as a result of the information that you've received today? That might be going away and reviewing a policy. That might be going away and clarifying a process that you might think, actually, I don't know what our complaints process is. I'm going to go and look that up. It might be having a conversation internally. Like I said, I know that not all of you will be empowered to make some of these changes yourself, but that doesn't mean you can't go away and have a conversation with somebody next step up in the chain to say, actually, I've learned these things today and I think there are some things that we could change. Noting that down as a thing that you're going to do, it can be a really good thing. And also looking at how decisions are recorded, that might be something that you are able to do. What I want to do is for you to leave here today with something concrete that you're able to put into action so you feel empowered to be able to do that. So thank you so much for listening today and for your engagement in the chat. It's really helpful to see where you all are and have you all contributing. The new code isn't about creating fear and lots of extra paperwork for the sake of it. It's about creating and demonstrating confidence that your organisation can fundraise responsibly and transparently and in line with its values, and that you can demonstrate that if you're ever asked to do. So we've got some time for Q&A. If there's anything here that we've not covered today or anything that's sparked some things you want to ask about. I know I've seen some things come through in the chat. Mike says, I'm curious about the new guidance on charities refusing rejecting donations. Does it feel like there's now a higher bar for what counts as a legitimate reason for rejecting a donation? If so, what's the reason behind this change? I worry this looks like a politicized decision given the endless culture wars and recent criticisms of charities. Where is it go? Sorry, when you changed the screen, Emma, it moved the chat.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all right, don't worry. Where did we get to?
Yeah, I've just,
Or is it just that there's now a higher bar for? I think there is a higher bar for documenting all decisions that are made within the organisation, and that you can demonstrate the rationale behind anything that's happening, but looking particularly at rejecting a donation, it's explicitly set out that rejection should be, what's the term that they use? Let's see if I can find it. Should be rare, I think is what they said, and reasonable. So they're not expecting you to reject many donations at all. They're expecting you to accept the majority of them, and that you must have really good legitimate reasons for rejecting that. And I think those are what they want to see, that you have laid out explicitly. And mostly I think that will be because those donations are coming from sources that don't align with your organisation's values. So like I was saying, if you're a lung cancer charity, that you won't accept donations from people who who are not people who smoke. We would never get any donations at all, but from organisations that are linked with smoking or gambling and things like that. Whatever that means for your organisation, I think that is what they're expecting you to be really explicit about. They're not expecting you to turn down many donations at all. They want to see as many donations accepted as possible, but recognise that that's not always going to align with your organisation's values. So I hope that makes sense. I don't think it's something that's been politicised, and I don't think it's to do with Christian for Charities rejecting big donations. I think it's just tightening everything up. So if there is criticism, you can absolutely demonstrate why you made the decisions that you did, and that you have that policy set out.
Great.
Are there
Thank you,
any?
Stacey.
You're welcome. Are there any guidelines you can recommend on running match funding campaign? It's not something that I particularly work in at the moment, so I can't think of anything up to date that would probably help you, Lindsay. If there's anything anybody else knows that they can help Lindsay out, that would be really helpful. On running. No, there's nothing that springs to mind on that one, Lindsay, I'm afraid. That's a really poor answer, but that is the answer I have for you. Sally, when there is a crossover with care teams, legacy conversations, are we as fundraising team responsible for ensuring that care teams are fully aware of all the implications and requirements to record those? Yes, absolutely. Anybody who comes into contact with someone where a legacy conversation might happen, where a conversation around making a donation might happen, it's absolutely your responsibility as a fundraising team to ensure that everybody is aware of those guidance, or at least aware of where they can go to find that guidance and who they need to talk to, and point that supporter to if the conversation moves in a direction that they don't feel comfortable with answering. Sometimes this is just as much to empower them not to have that conversation, for them to have the conversation with the right team who has been really well trained, as it is making sure they have all the information that they need. And so does this feed into the board having overall governance? Absolutely. I mean, this is another reason why you keep that your board needs to be informed of everything that you're doing and all the decisions that you're making, is because they have that top-down overview of everything, and they can sometimes join up things that we don't see as fundraisers because we're head down getting on with what we need to do. But really, the code is about making sure everybody who needs to know what is best practice and what your policies are has sight and overview of those policies, and can either have those conversations if they feel empowered to do so, or are empowered to not have those conversations and point them in the right direction. Sorry, I've Googled and I can't find anything. No, I don't know anywhere where there is anything about match funding guidance. Dan, is there a definition of unmanned donation points? Might be a slightly silly question. We have multiple contact points across our visitor sites, often very close to members of our front of house teams. Do they count as unmanned? Not specifically manned, but there are lots of staff around who can answer most of the questions I would expect supporters to ask. I think there is no definition of unmanned donation points. I suppose, again, that comes down to a judgment for you and your organisation of what you would term as unmanned. If you would feel comfortable that some of your contact points across your visitor centres are actually manned, or at least manned some of the time, then if you can make that justification and document that justification, think again, just to reiterate that that is the key point here. Most of this is for you to make those decisions, but you need to be able to document those decisions and show your justifications for why you've made those decisions if you were ever asked to. If you received a complaint that someone didn't know, about something to do with why you had a donation pot out on the side, then could you justify why you didn't put that information out? I mean, in a lot of times, if you're unsure and it doesn't cost very much money to just put up a little poster or a little sign near that unmanned donation point to say all of the things that we were talking about before, who you are, what that money will do, especially if you're fundraising for capital appeal through unmanned, I would just do it anyway. I think sometimes it's better, isn't it, to be belt and braces, and to put everything you can out there, and then you're not going to fall foul of anything that you should or shouldn't have done because you've done it anyway. But I think if you can justify it and you can document why you made those decisions, you should be covered. Sally, is it required to do due diligence on all companies, corporate partners we might expect donation from, or just on those large and unusual donations? There isn't particularly any guidance around that, and so it's probably something that you need to have a conversation with internally. I think if you have your gift acceptance policy in place that sets out who you will or will not accept gifts from, that kind of sets out who you will or will not work with. And so if somebody doesn't look right, or somebody doesn't seem to fit that gift acceptance policy, then you might want to do some more due diligence on them anyway. But that's definitely an internal conversation to have and set out what that means for your organisation, whether that's just looking at those larger unusual ones, or whether you're going to do some due diligence on all companies. If there's anything at all that rings an alarm bell, it's always worth doing that due diligence on them rather than leaving it to chance. And that might be what your policy says. If there's anything there that's raising any red flags for our organisation that doesn't align with our values, we will do our due diligence on them, whether they're expected to make a large or unusual donation. But again, it comes down, unfortunately, to what you decide as an organisation is best fit. This is why I talked about at the beginning that it's great that the new code allows us to be flexible in what fits the scenarios for each of our organisations, but it also leaves us with a lot of responsibility around what we feel is right for our organisation, because the buck stops with us, so we need to make sure we have everything in place. So it just might mean we're a bit more belt and braces than we would be normally, but as long as everything is set out and recorded, then you should be fine. You just need to be able to justify why you made those decisions for your organisation. And I hope that helps. Was that everybody? Fantastic. Well, I hope that all helped you and it wasn't too dry.
Absolutely not. No, that was a
Good.
absolutely fascinating run through that. And I think what it really has highlighted for me is the extent to which we should all, as fundraisers, be talking to our colleagues about ensuring that fundraising is at the heart of everything that the organisation does and is on a level playing field almost with every other policies. One question that I just wondered was whether the regulator itself provides any templates or assistance in devising these sorts of policies that we're now supposed to be coming up with.
No, not that I've seen. I haven't seen that they explicitly set out any policies. There are a number of organisations out there that have got templates and policies to have a look at. Charity Excellence Framework do a lot of policies that people can look at, and it's completely free. It's just then making it fit for your organisation, which is already a good start. And again, this is where AI can be really useful to help you with your templates, that can give you a base template that you can then take away and discuss as an organisation. So that might be another. Also, lots of organisations post their policies on their websites. So a little bit of competitor research never goes astray when you're looking, rather than starting from scratch, because starting with a blank piece of paper as a trust fundraiser is really tricky. So yeah, I can't think of anything that the regulator has put out, but I will have a look, and if I find anything, I'll let you know, Emma, so you can let everyone else know.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think the other thing that this has really highlighted for me is that thing about making sure that all those decisions are linked to all the other organizational policies. So certainly any organization that I'm working with, either as a trustee or as a consultant, I'm going to be asking them about their fundraising policies now, and making sure that that's embedded in the work of the organisation, in the way that health and safety is, safeguarding, and all those other sorts of things that we take for granted now, as particularly as organisations grow.
Absolutely.
It's clearly absolutely critical that it's in there, and this gives a fantastic framework.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for outlining.
You're very
That's
welcome.
been really, really helpful.
Good.
And far more fun and interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Good.
Does anyone else have any final comments or questions? Maybe pop them in the chat or raise your hands quickly. We're just coming up to 10, so we've got a couple more minutes if you want to stay, but if not, I can't see anything else. So just to say, Sophie's put the link to our feedback form into the chat. It will also go out in the, and I do apologise if the right feedback form hasn't gone out in the follow-up email that you get from Ticket Tailor. We haven't updated that, I think, for a couple of months. A little bit of handover issues. And then she's also reminded us that we have a group on LinkedIn, and that this recording will be put up onto YouTube a bit later. So if you missed anything, or you want to replay it, if there's any other questions that you know that you have, just let us know or pop them in our LinkedIn, or indeed connect with Stacey.
Yes, please do. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, if you have any other questions, please do reach out.
Lovely. I'm going to stop the recording now.